Researchers find that quantum hypothesis can be utilized to move abilities starting with one mind, then onto the next, and they openly spread their innovation. Today we will recap the tale of the 2015 film Psyche Gamers. Crow wearing a cleric's propensity bows before a huge painting of Christ. Monsignor Moscow approaches him and orders him to stand up. Moscow specifies that individuals have been discussing Crow's work. Crow guards himself and says that physical science and confidence are firmly related. He then says that religion is dead and his work can be accustomed to take the loyal back to the congregation anyway. Moscow offers an obscure expression about seeing the records at the shelter. Moscow orders Crow to open a door and they both step in. Moscow calls Crow a man of science who became a priest when he needed funds for his research. Crow's assistants are waiting for them in the room. They are assembled around something. The associates spread out and Monsignor Moscow sees a kid wired and associated with some machine. He is stunned and fingers the cross dangling. He moves suddenly towards the kid yet is limited by Crow's aides. Crow takes Moscow's staff. The youthful bioengineers present themselves, beginning with Dylan, followed by Agnes. Next is Maddie, who is trailed by Rollo, and afterward Jackson. They are all examination understudies of DDM Institute established by Crow. They are given a chip which they put on their necks. Jackson is at his PC watching a man calling out for help. The following scene shows Agnes in bed. As an alert awakens them, Jackson explores his direction through dozing understudies. On his way outside, he wakes Dylan and Rollo on out. He goes to his office. He sees a bit of blood on the floor and goes as far as look at it. When the assessor approaches him, Jackson lets him know that he is right on time via hello and strolls to his work area. The assessor questions his decision of colleagues. Jackson makes sense of why he picked every one of them. For Rollo, he says he picked him due to his lab abilities and experience. He says Dylan is great with profound planning. The assessor calls them freaks and eats up. Jackson proceeds to make sense of that he picked Maddie and Agnes. The assessor closes his inquiries by saying they trust Jackson, which is the reason he was given approved admittance. Jackson and Dylan watch a video of a trial did at. In the video, the main man had the option to control the cerebrum of the other. Back at the foundation, all the colleagues assemble around a dead-end artist named Voltaire who will be the subject of their tests. Jackson advises Voltaire to utilize his brain to lift his hand. Yet the scene changes to the assessor let Jackson know that the administration of the institute is getting eager following 2 years of no outcomes. Agnes is watching a state of bats soaring over the structures, and she looked through his pockets and takes a sachet of what is probably a medication. Maddie steps in and removes it from her from earshot of the others. Rollo lets Jackson know that Agnes cannot go through the security checks due to the medications she has taken. He likewise says that security at the institute had never been this tight and that anything they are hanging around for should be huge since they were doing finished biometric. Jackson says that Agnes will be fine. They all pass through the entryway starting with Jackson. The other watches Agnes comes through. When she passes, they notice a security fellow strolling towards them. Jackson drives Agnes away and the others follow. They are compelled to come by a ring of safety anyway. The security folks stop them since they are clearing away. The significant man is wearing a dark hood and sitting in a wheelchair moved by Monsignor Moscow. Every one of the understudies are presently sitting in an auditorium while the Silva, one of the staff at the foundation, presents Gabriel Croy. Moscow pushes the hooded man onto the stage. The hood is taken out anyway. Croy wears a gold-hued veil on the lower piece of his face. A few seconds into his discourse, he encounters distress along the edge of his mid-region. Moscow races to his side to help him anyway. He declines. Rather, Moscow pushes him, starting with one finish of the stage, then on to the next. Croy presents his creation, which he named Enoch. A machine works like the human mind. Croy said that he is looking for a gathering that would have the option to commit Enoch to their work alone. Before he proceeds with, he is intruded on by a young woman remaining at the rear of the lobby. She questions Krutz's thought processes in the making of Enoch. She closes her short discourse by advising the understudies to awaken, after which she leaves. Jackson follows her out of the lobby. He at last finds her on the top of the structure where she remains on the edge. The following scene shows Agnes awakening from a fantasy. Jackson is in the room with her and pulls her up. He sits next to her and inquires as to whether she is okay. Maddie strolls in right now. Rollo likewise strolls in. Dylan then gets through the entryway with pills in the two his outstretched hands. Maddie wakes up at Jackson to take Dylan from the room. Jackson gets up to do that. As Dylan and Jackson step into the lobby, Jackson hears his name. He meters away in the center of the foyer. They stroll towards him. Subsequent to trading good tidings, the assessor gives Jackson an envelope and lets him know that the expert has called him. Jackson ventures out in a suit and a dark vehicle gets him. In the vehicle, he watches a video of his more youthful self making sense of a trial. The vehicle stops on an abandoned road and he gets out. Moscow gets him and escorts him down a dim lobby to an entryway on the manor. At the point when they get to the entryway, it opens and Moscow pushes Jackson in. The light comes on and Jackson understands that he is remaining over a gap. He peers down. He is entranced and lowers down to have a more critical hope, to have a more critical look. As he rises up to respect a cross he sees on the wall before him, he hears Croy's voice behind him. He turns around to see Croy in his wheelchair wearing a Crow lets him know that he once served God when it fit his motivations. He then says that his present status could have been a discipline for his misrepresentation. He blames Jackson for utilizing his colleagues to seek after his own finishes. Jackson denied this. Croy vows to help Jackson to accomplish his point of individual greatness in return for the rebuilding of his body. In the following scene, Jackson, still in his suit, races to a door, opens it. He turns around to find the woman who addressed Croy in the auditorium behind him. He envisions the two of them in bed. He likewise sees her tumbling from a rooftop. This last vision jerks him back to the real world. Clearly, the woman isn't behind him, and it is each of the a dream or fantasy. Agnes is perched on the floor and composing on pieces of paper with crimson ink. In the meantime, Maddie is standing by listening to a teacher. Marcus Deeks trashed the biotags that the understudies were given when they first got to the foundation back in quite a while. Office Jackson clarifies his most recent trial for Voltaire. Jackson can return a harmed and dead rodent once again to life utilizing Enoch. Voltaire is stunned when he sees it. Stella, the woman in Jackson's fantasies, unexpectedly shows up and poses an inquiry. Agnes dumps her plume and walks out to the rooftop. She is putting on a little wing. While as yet running, Jackson is stumbled by Stella. He staggers and tumbles to the floor. He attempts to figure out what her identity is and what she is doing in the lab, yet she avoids his inquiries with her own inquiries. She then lets him know that Agnes is done. On hearing this, Jackson runs out of the lab. Maddie emerges to the rooftop similarly as Agnes begins to fall while Jackson watches from beneath. Agnes lands face first on the substantial while Maddie shouts and Jackson watches in shock. Every one of the understudies hold a candlelight vigil for Agnes. Maddie strolls into Agnes' previous room. She is crying as she does so. She feels somebody close and suddenly turns around to see Stella simply behind her. Stella is wearing Agnes' wraparound. Stella eliminates the robe and leaves as Maddie scowls at her. De Silva tells Jackson, Rollo, and Dylan that another swap has been found for their group. She portrays this new part as excessively splendid, and she trusts that functioning in a gathering will tame her. Jackson, Rollo, and Dylan sit unobtrusively while Stella, with her legs on the table, is tasting espresso. He invites her to the group. She goes to remain before one of the screens in the lab, and the showcase changes. Frightened, Jackson rushes over to the screen. He asks her how she treated the screens, yet she overlooks him and leaves, yet she disregards him and leaves. Later in their room, Rollo makes sense of that Agnes' self-destruction was her last evidence that we don't pass on, we continue to exist somewhere else. Jackson says that somebody messed with his trial. Rollo is irate. He gets irritated at Jackson for discussing a rodent when they are discussing Agnes' demise. Dylan quiets him and says that individuals lament in various ways. In the meantime, Maddie is in her room perusing a line from a strict book over and over. Stella passes on the grounds and strolls to a close-by complex loaded up with deserted structures in different phases. A few odd characters utilize the office for their dance practice. The remainder of the group, with the exception of Maddie, tell her aside from Maddie tell her they avoid sight of both her and the artist. She stops. Voltaire is brought to her. Clearly, he is one of the artists. At that point, Rollo and the others come jumping in, with Rollo undermining the artist in the event that they don't let Stella go anyway. They carry Voltaire into the lab. Rollo ponders out loud the way in which Voltaire can move his hand. It seems obvious him that Stella approached Enoch, yet he then considers how she got the code. Stella strolls in and says that they generally added to making it conceivable. Maddie likewise strolls in at that point and inquires as to whether Agnes' demise likewise had an impact since it opened a space for Stella in the group. She eliminates her profile label, says the task should stop, and leaves. Voltaire lets them know they can't stop since this is the way he gets his body and life back. As Rollo and Dylan endeavor to follow her, Stella turns around and plays out a portion of Voltaire's moves. Everybody is stunned. Rollo says that it implies Stella and Voltaire are both associated on the organization. Jackson blames Stella for taking the codes for Enoch. Jackson is irritated that Croix gave Stella all his work and exploration anyway. Rollo counters that it is really his examination which Jackson took for himself. He adds that he doesn't mind since companions should share. He requests that Stella interface him to the organization. He likewise tosses a couple of tricks. Dylan likewise allows Stella to associate him. The two of them run off to test their new abilities. Rollo proposes that they could interface every one of the understudies. Stella differs and says that somebody must be off the organization to go about as the control. She recommends that Jackson takes up the job since that is what he has for a long time needed in the interim. Moscow awakens Croix and puts a bio label on him. Croix has a dream of him in bed with De Silva. Jackson goes to thump on Maddie's entryway. She is watching one more video of Deeks. Jackson continues to beat on her entryway to stand out. He likewise tunes in through the entryway at the video. Maddie at last comes to the entryway. She has a major stick in her grasp. Maddie is going to stir things up around town with a stick when Rollo calls out to him and removes him. White as a phantom, the understudies are at a ball held to honor their graduation from the institute. In the interim, Moscow is planning. Croix, Rollo, and Dylan begin moving together. Rollo contacts Jackson and advises him to start the assessor strolls in. Right now the main subject is a young lady named Minnie who says she doesn't have any idea how to move. Rollo persuades her to attempt, and through her association with the organization, Voltaire comes in with his team and they all pick bio labels and put them on their necks. Dylan is at the turntable. Jackson urges him to give the word. Dylan delivers a short discourse about joining everybody in the lobby together. He then commencement and hops into the group. At the count of 1, everybody begins moving the same way while Voltaire and Croix start recovering a portion of their versatility. Jackson sees that quiets and sweeps are down. He attempts to arrive at his companions with this data, yet they can't hear him. Voltaire recovers all-out versatility and joins the moving. In the interim, Jackson sees the video of a young lady. The artists have now moved out of the structure and are remaining on the moves toward it. In the interim, Stella watches from a roof. Jackson likewise sees Stella on his screen. Croix is at last on his feet. Jackson sees a red figure in the artists. He perceives the individual as Maddie comes to the front of the gathering and eliminates her hood. Rollo is in front. He perceives her yet is shocked to see her dress like that. She goes after him with a slugger in her grasp. Seeing this, Jackson runs out of the lab. At the point when he falls, she takes his profile tag and puts it on her neck. Her activity causes some disturbance on the organization. She proceeds to go after different artists, understudies. Voltaire and some others retaliate. She overwhelms them with the exception of one who takes her out. Stella is as yet watching from her roost and shows some feeling when Maddie is taken out. Jackson at last arrives. He is caught by De Silva, who blames him for killing every one of the understudies due to his desire. Assessor ambushes her as he begins to beat her. Jackson comes to go after him. He faces Jackson and they battle. Jackson at last overwhelms him and takes him out. He then goes to the ridiculous De Silva. Her final words are, "It might have been so unique, you might have been so unique." Jackson is remaining among the fallen groups of his companions and partners when he sees Stella remaining somewhere far off. He continues to take a gander at her until he is wrecked by a dark vehicle. Stella mouths the words, "I'm grieved," and leaves. She strolls to where Enoch is kept. She sees Moscow tied to a bed or the like. Croix strolls in. He momentarily discusses his battle to control Enoch and how he has at last dominated it. Stella goes to confront him. As she takes a gander at him, the lights go off and the entryway closes. Somewhat frightened, he asks what this implies and who she is. We see a flashback to when she was a young lady and he was a cleric back in the present. Kreutz understands that she is Enoch. She begins to fall once more into the gap. He holds her back, yet she crumbles and he is left holding slim air as he freezes completely still. The following scene shows a standing Croix conveying a talk to the understudies of his institute. Jackson and his group are all among the crowd. Stella is likewise remaining at the rear of the lobby. De Silva emerges as he closes his discourse, and they clasp hands as the understudies give him a thunderous applause. Stella grins and leaves the lobby. The following scene shows her at the unwanted structure, perplexing as the structures crumble and begin twirling around. A vacuum shows up before her and a drop of blood tumbles from her eye into it. What is your take of this film? Kindly leave your answers in the remarks segment. Assuming you partook in this recap, make sure to like and subscribe in so you can observe new recaps as we are transferred.